Our next presenter is Walter Kleinschmit. Walter is a real estate professional who has spent his professional life working in the industry, beginning in the Bay Store, Winnipeg, to managing the development of international iconic mixed-use centers in urban and greenfield situations. Since his return to Canada, Walter's passions has been centered in community activism, focusing on balancing change options in a mature community he lives in, St. Boniface, and promoting a healthy and sustainable strategy to preserve, honor, and reutilize historical buildings and heritage sites. And I also want to thank him for his participation on behalf of Heritage St. Boniface, a partner with Heritage Winnipeg. So without further ado, Walter, your presentation.
Thanks, Cindy. And I'm pleased to be here. And I must say this, as the second last speaker, has been so much better than I even dared dream to expect. It's been wonderful to listen to. And I would like to take a credit minute on the question and answer by going back to the previous question. Robert, I think, indicated a price of $150 million to rehab the building without leasehold improvements, to make it ready to rent. Well, $150 million, it's a lot of money, but it's only $300 per square foot of usable, leasable area. And that's basically the cost of developing a shopping center. I've done a few myself, so I know that the number is not at all so scary. And I wish people would stop scaring each other. And I hope this community that's listening in today will reconsider certain points of view. With that said, I would like to introduce a boring subject, a process by which groups like this one, has been demonstrated by all the ideas already brought up, can work together to develop a solution so that we have some marching papers to eventually give architects call a scope of work. So what I would like to do is to start off, I got first of all, minor detail. Share my screen. And right here. And I believe you have it.
Yeah, you're off the screen, you're good.
Okay, good. So basically what I want to do is to, as I mentioned, talk about understanding the starting point of the process. A lot of ideas have come through today, and they will have to be assembled, collated, analyzed, and prioritized. And I'm providing something which just developing the process with one application idea. But many ideas will come out of this, and eventually they'll have to be selected. So from my point of view, this demonstration, if you want, starts with the starting point is a historical recognizable building with a storyline that predates Manitoba by 200 years, and which goes well into the future. The rest has been said. I will skip to the next one. What to do and how do we start? We need to remember yesterday, we need to understand today, and we need to imagine tomorrow. And the word imagine is a title we give to this presentation. And I was so happy to hear used so often this afternoon, because it is at the root of what needs to be done. The objective I've set out in developing this process, in demonstrating this process, which architects use often under a scenario called a charrette, is we need a development that needs to have a raison d'être, a purpose, which will attract enough activity to be financially viable. In the case of a redevelopment or repurposing, we need to define the destination, which is the sum of its attributes. And in this case, that values the building's importance and meaning to the community, as well as meet the needs of the evolving community today and for the future, and is financially viable. Typically, a successful destination needs a big idea, and the process pulls together various elements to shape the big idea. The physical facility has been much better discussed and demonstrated earlier, so I won't read it again in save time, other than to suggest that we must not forget to deal with the parking problems of the eventual use for the building, and whether it's cheaper to build parking below the bay, as been recommended by some studies, or to make a deal with the owner of the parkade. So this is a detail, but those are the kind of questions that come up as we distill and put together the best use. Again, Winnipeg has been described earlier. I remind you, real estate, whatever it is a function of location, location, location. And I identified a number of elements here, including the Forks, the first meeting place of all of the members of the Hudson's Bay Company in terms of the traders and our local community, and for 1,000 years, never mind hundreds of years, and showing the bay on the west side of Portage of the quadrant and its importance, with the legislative building on one side and key commercial buildings on the right side, the Arts Gallery, the University of Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Archives, the Manitoba Archives, etc. So with that kind of background and that kind of bias, and with apologies to members of our First Nations, which were not able to participate today, although I did discuss this idea with some at one time, I'm developing an idea which is understanding our past and projecting our future. That's the underlying theme. The Bay owes its origins to the Indigenous people that inhabited the land long before we showed up, and dedicate the building to celebrate that history and help build a more inclusive future. And that includes content with history, full gamut of services to members, specialty educational facilities, possibly offices, art and craft center, music themed area for training, production, concert venue, retail and F&B of relevant nature, including market. In fact, F&B will be part of any solution we have if we want to be commercially viable, and possibly the relocation of the Hudson's Bay Archives, and Indigenous History Archives, and possibly a National Research Center. Those are the things that fit together and probably fit in the space available around the big idea. It reflects, as somebody has mentioned, more than one person has mentioned earlier, collaboration between Indigenous past and our collective future, because we're all part of that future, but we have to move together. And the financial model for that scenario would be a mix of government, corporate, and consumption. And by consumption, I think I'm referring to the rent paid by the tenants that will operate some of those facilities in the retail and the restaurant, and some of the concert areas, etc. But what I want to emphasize is that is only one idea, and that this idea comes out, and today we've seen a lot of ideas being shared through the chat mechanism. And if we spend the time that this process would normally take, we could end up with a lot of ideas and then narrow them down into workable ideas with financial analysis, and then acceptable ideas to the community, and then to a final idea. What I always found in my development practice, mostly in the Middle East in this case, of doing project, is the biggest enemy of a project is 5 good ideas, because that's 4 too many. So eventually we have to have the courage to have the discipline to do a proper process so that the idea that comes to us is a great idea and is a workable idea. You know, as an example, we can think of the Museum of Human Rights, totally different situation. But the architecture of the building was created after the museum purpose, content, expectation was defined, and the architecture reflected that. And I think the same opportunity is necessary as part of the Hudson's Bay. Let's know what we want to do with it, and then develop a content situation for it. Other ideas that could work, I've not thought about them financially speaking, but they could work. A memory center, which has been shared with us by one of our members, a World Indigenous Center, an Indigenous Center for Canada, a Center for Genealogy. The one that's most easiest to commercialize, the Family Entertainment Sports Center, combination of aquariums, water park, Kidzania, Legoland, roller rink, dance studio, sports bar. Think of the Gourmasian brothers that opened Mall of Edmonton as the world's largest shopping center in the 70s. It was a crazy idea, but it was so crazy that it worked, and it attracted people from the whole Western North America as to patronize it. Building Small Business Incubation Center, which is the current flavor of the month, if not the decade, of creating facilities for shared offices, retail space, and training centers, along with the restaurants and meeting halls and so on in the upstairs. Somebody's mentioned an art and craft and a community center, workspace, artist and residence space, display and exhibition space, retail outlets of some of the handicrafts being made, supply center, part of an incubation of ideas and services. It'd be a super space, it'd be almost an overcommitment, but that is really investing into the future of the community. Food and more food, a big part of the above, tailored to suit whatever is happening with the envelope of the building or the contents of the building. Because
Sorry, Walter, to interject, we'll have to wrap up in a minute, just so we can
okay,
get
I've
our
got one
last
slide to
speaker.
go, I'm finished.
Okay.
And the food hall and the revolution which is taking place around the world, so much could happen, and it's written up. And in conclusion, the approach of a charrette, of sitting around like we have done today, but on a longer time frame, would create the possibility of developing a chaos of ideas to create a big idea, which then becomes organized in a discipline by an architectural creativity and engineering discipline. And then at the same time, we do the financial plan for each component, and because we need to be diversified to appeal to our stakeholders and the financial stakeholders. We'll have to do it a few times until a program is done. I think it's very realizable. I've worked on similar projects elsewhere, and I think just the carbon offset value of not building something new is worth some investment dollars, credits that we should be able to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Walter. I greatly appreciate your presentation. Sorry, we've got a little bit of time constraints to get our last but not least speaker in for our last presentation before we end.